For all the teabaggers and teabagging networks out there who thought they were part of a bipartisan or nonpartisan movement, it took exactly 1 day for the Republican Party to reveal the truth. You belong to them. Our fourth story tonight, John Boehner, the House Republican leader, telling TheHill.com about the teabag protesters. Quote, "We should embrace them. These are Americans who believe that their government at all levels are going in the wrong direction, and they're tired of it." On the movement's future, quote, "We'll see, but clearly they're responding to a lot of what we've had to say in Washington over the past couple of months." And despite mockery of their symbolic choice, there are warnings today on both sides of the aisle about teabagging's future. Huffington Post founder Arianna Huffington writing, quote, "I think Democrats need to be careful not to turn their backs on what could become a dangerous conflagration, a grassroots populist backlash fueled by the perception that the Obama economic team is treating Wall Street with kid gloves." This even as the Huffington Post reports some Republicans are also worried about the teabag impact. Quote, "It is not clear-cut that the Tea Party phenomena helps the GOP unless they have a specific measure or policy to coalesce around." Referring to the anger on display and possibly some of the hateful, violent sentiment expressed on Wednesday, the co-founder of Unity 08, Republican Doug Bailey, said, quote, "It is particularly ineffective for the Republican Party when it is Rush Limbaugh and the like stirring it up. That just doesn't speak to the middle." With us now is MSNBC political analyst Eugene Robinson, also columnist and associate editor at The Washington Post. And Eugene, good evening.
Hi, David.
Eugene, you had a warning of your own in your column today about the politics of this movement, assuming someone turns it into a movement. What is your warning?
My warning is that I think potentially there's an opening there for the Republicans that they might be able to exploit. And it's essentially I saw the same opening that Arianna saw. The argument, a kind of a populist critique of the Obama administration's performance, particularly in response to the financial crisis. And the idea, you've given all this money to the banks. What have you done for ordinary, hardworking Americans? And this is an opening that potentially could widen, I think. Say we began an economic recovery tomorrow, it would still be months and months before unemployment even peaked, much less started going down. So there's going to be a period of time at some point when Wall Street is back, the stock market's doing well, the banks, reporting even better profits than they've been reporting the last few days, and unemployment's still going up and people are still hurting. And that disconnect, I think, is potentially exploitable by opponents of the administration. I wouldn't ignore it.
Let's say Republicans lead a big populist movement against helping out the banks. What happens later this year when Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner says, okay, here are the bank regulations we need? What does the GOP say at that point?
Well, I think you essentially, if you're the GOP, anybody in Washington, I think, has to believe in better regulation of the banks at this point. I think opposing that is a losing strategy. So you say something like, President Obama has finally seen the light or something like that, and then you vote for it and you change the subject again. You start talking about the deficit. You talk about he wants to spend all this money on health care, all this money on pie in the sky energy. That's your money, and we ought to give it back to you. And, now, is there a coherent political ideology or argument in this? Perhaps not, but there is a feeling out there, and you can kind of capture that, and perhaps you can mobilize it in a way that's helpful to your side.
In What's the Matter with Kansas, Thomas Frank wrote about rich Republicans using social issues to convince poor and middle-class voters to vote against their own economic self-interest. How do you actually use economic issues to get voters to vote against their own economic self-interest?
Well, that is a good question, but how do you get people out there on Wednesday complaining Barack Obama is going to raise my taxes when actually Barack Obama is going to cut their taxes? So, it is, I think, in part more about this anti-Washington, anti-Wall Street, anti the big guy feeling, rather than those inconvenient specifics of exactly what the policy would do to your bottom line. And you don't actually want a whole lot of attention paid to that, I think.
After the Bush administration exploited the Christian right, Bush insider David Quo blew the whistle on it, as Keith actually first reported here on Countdown, feeding into evangelical skepticism towards the GOP. How much does the GOP need to worry about economic David Quo's coming forward, and what would that do to the party?
You know, I don't think they would have to worry a whole lot about it. I mean, I'm not convinced that the GOP in its current kind of fractured state is going to coalesce around this kind of populist argument that I think is out there for them. But let's suppose that they did. Remember what happened with the evangelicals. How many years did evangelicals stick faithfully, loyally with Republicans while essentially getting none of their agenda worked on, and certainly nothing passed that they really wanted? They got very little out of the deal, and eventually that started to dawn on people that this was more lip service than real action. And but that took a while. I mean, that took many years, and so potentially, I think, if Republicans could make that populist argument, it might take a while for people to catch on.
Eugene Robinson of the Washington Post and MSNBC. Eugene, thanks as always. Have a great weekend.
You too, David.